Hi, I hadn't planned on doing a video this early after uploading my last one yesterday, but I had been thinking about something. I've been thinking about my senior year of high school, and although I've been mentioning one experience in particular, I want to talk about the other things and their emotional impact on me. The time I want to explain why they were so important to me. And this is a channel about healing and about introspection. Well, actually, this particular video, is about healing, part of my healing process. Um, I had mentioned that I had begun seeing a therapist. I had had I'd had quite a bit happen to me in the last 5 years. My mom died. We had to move about that same time, and I had to move again a month after my mom, discovering my mom was dead, and I only had a month to do it, and I and my mom had certain things, one certain um, thing that had been there. Um, she heard voices and harassing voices and constantly, and in all other respects she was perfectly normal. She was a very good, excellent mother. I think she was one of the best mothers in the world, and I feel very lucky to have had her as a mom. She was a parent. We were best friends, and she knew me more deeply, closer than anybody else in the world. Um, but growing up, she did hear harassing voices, and um, I wanted to explore that with a therapist. I figured with these different issues and the issue in senior year of high school, um, there were a few things. Um, so so 2020, something like that. I figured it's time to start talking with somebody, because I would reach out to friends and classmates and other acquaintances from my past, and they really didn't have time for me. So I figured I guess I have to pay somebody to listen to me. So it's been basically like rent a friend. These therapists, one would get, I would have a few sessions, and then that person would get promoted, and typically they were done on the little screen on the phone, or just talking over the phone by audio, and it wasn't really that much help. Fortunately, now I do have a therapist that I do see in person. We've had a couple of sessions already, and I want to make as much. Sorry, I'm looking at my phone, speaking of phones. I want to make as much progress as possible, and I shouldn't go into detail, but about the one thing in senior year of high school, I had a revelation of sorts from somebody that clued me in, and I want to make it clear that I'm quick to shift perspectives when I learn something that sheds a new light, or changes the outlook on something or perception of something. I'm very open minded, and I just want to heal from that whole experience. So anyway, I want to talk about the other very important and impactful, emotionally impactful things going on at that time. Not only was it senior year in high school, therefore I was finishing up high school, but emotionally, throughout school, um, I guess even if you were to ask me in elementary school, I'd still say I felt that I wasn't popular. I was happy. I was very happy. But in middle school and then in high school, the feeling of not being popular and being left out um, became more so. It wasn't only a feeling of popularity, non-popularity, and I don't necessarily want to call it ostracization, but it was a feeling like girls didn't see me as attractive, and I wasn't as aggressive as the other boys. So I just, and I didn't consider myself a nerd, basically because nerd was a put down, a demeaning, derogatory term. And my conception of a nerd was, well, I would watch a lot of television, and I would think of a nerd as being somebody with a pocket protector and large glasses and awkward behavior. I wasn't like that at all. I was like I am now. Um, I was very much just like I am now. I didn't I didn't feel as though I had enough money. I didn't feel as though I was popular enough to even try to talk with the other kids. So in lunch, I would sit by myself and I would just do work or take a book with me. I read a few books. A Wrinkle in Time was one of them, and then not only Wrinkle in Time, but the following books. Now, out of school, I was very active. Um, I've got to cut short. I'll be right back. Out of school, I was very interested in things that made me feel more sophisticated than the other kids in school. My perception of the kid, not that I'm egocentric or narcissistic, I simply went with my passions and my interests and let the chips fall where they may. And it just seemed from the way I felt demeaned, and the other kids in school would point out, look who's sitting next to you. I remember that was in elementary school, look who's sitting next to you. And they would ask me questions like sex questions in elementary school. Do you know what this word means? Do you know what that word means? As if I was like a laughing stock. And now, as I say that, maybe that's the best way of putting it. Not necessarily ostracization, but I felt as though they were having, not that they were making, it's not that they were making fun of me. That wasn't the experience. It was like I was a puppet and they were like a clown, and they were just asking me things and um, making me feel different from them. But outside of school, in elementary school, I was reading adult books. One of my favorite passions was UFOs primarily and ghosts, but I had a huge collection of UFO books. The authors were Jacques Vallée, Bud Hopkins. Um, those are the two that come to mind. Leonard Stringfield, a number of others that would talk about UFO cases and observation, how credible the witnesses were. I mean, like in an adult way, they were analyzing the cases um, and evidence for and against, so forth. I mean, really like adult books. I had a nice large collection. These were from the 1950s and 60s and 70s primarily, some from the 80s. And I really treasured those books, and I left many of them behind. It was one of the few stupid things I regret. Um, but that was one passion of mine in elementary school, and I had begun watching Star Trek, and I felt sometimes as though that life would be better in the Star Trek universe, the more comfortable and more adult and more compassionate and all those different traits than it had been in school. Not that I was like a basket case or an extreme case where I wanted to leave school and go into a fantasy world, but um, I would feel picked on in school. And when I was watching Star Trek, I felt as though I was in my own element, and the episodes would comment on society, on philosophy, on the human condition, on human behavior, and it would be very speculative and intellectually interesting and challenging, and it spoke to me more. So I was more at home with that. Um, Let me see. So anyway, and I enjoyed film and TV just in general. I was I, I don't want to belabor this video. If I think of something else at the time, I'll mention it. But that's what I was like outside of school. And I also had a couple of friends that I would play with outside. And when we would play, I don't want to call it play, when we would visit and get together, it would be myself meeting with one other person. It was very much one to one, and we would actually talk and we would share ideas. I've mentioned before, there's somebody in particular from Wetzel Road who's my best friend, and that was a very special friendship because we connected so well. Um, anyway, going back to senior year of high school, oh, I had also begun Boy Scouts somewhere in 1986 or something like that, and I had been, I think, a Cub Scout or Weeblos, something like that, where you have a den father, den mother. Um, anyway, senior year of high school, a number of those things would be concluding. I mean, they were scheduled to be concluding. I would be going to a radio station as part of earning my Eagle Scout rank, and that's the final rank in Boy Scouts. And I had been listening to talk radio. I'd begun listening to talk radio somewhere during high school, and again, that was something that was intellectually interesting, and I was becoming more politically aware, and I wanted to go into politics, and I wanted to run for president. And I was thinking about issues like economics and the national debt and demographics, whatever issues were there at the time, like foreign affairs and building a better world, all those different issues. And there was some kind of sense of pride imagining myself being president. And what I would do in the Oval Office on the desk, I'd have a sailing ship that I had won in a poetry contest. Well, I had gotten in a poetry contest. I think I had entered and gotten some competitive demonstration, whatever, however you phrase it. But as I remember, I think it was given because the other person didn't show up, something like that. But anyway, it was a model of the USS Constitution, and I wanted to put it on my desk if I were president in the Oval Office and have it displayed for the camera as a symbol of the progress of humanity and ourselves as a country. We're exploring. So And that jibes with Star Trek. I wanted to have some sense of Star Trek in my presidential term. I wanted to move us towards a society like depicted in Star Trek. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Anyway, I went to the. I guess I should mention this sort of more in chronological terms. I had initiated something. I'll be vague. I'd initiated something, and then I felt very proud that I had finally been able to do it. And although it was confusing, I I thought that it was moving towards something very happy. So I was very proud to keep doing it, and it was a way for me to finally express myself in words. And poetry. I'd begun writing poetry, and I felt that I was breaking the social barrier, and that I was brave enough to finally do it. And it and it and I got some inkling from other kids when I can't remember exact moments, but inkling from other classmates that it to the effect that it wasn't that bad. That I it was normal, and that I felt more accepted. Um and I had seen National Lampoon's Vacation, the movie. It may have been for the first time on TV, and I wanted to share it with somebody particular. I wanted very much to share it with somebody in particular because it was something I enjoyed. And family vacation. And I grew up as the only child with one parent, so maybe that had something to do with it. But I just enjoyed it. It was a comedy. I wanted to share it. And I remember in school there was a kind of a friendly competition, I think, amongst schools uh, to have the most number of volunteer swimmers in the gym. And I should say that in gym class, normally, at least as far back as middle school, maybe middle school. Yeah, middle school now that I think about it. I remember the other boys, it was boys' class and girls' class, and never the twain shall meet. Um, the boys were always aggressive. They knew sports like basketball or hockey or whatever. I enjoyed floor hockey, but they knew more about those sports than I did, and they were always like make name calling each other and looking to show who's stronger or tougher. That's my impression. And then I don't necessarily remember them picking on me, but I just didn't like that, and I wished I could get out of gym class, but I stuck through it. It's because that's what you do. You're in class. You're required to take this course, and it didn't even seem like a course. It was gym. Um, so I just went through and took it, and um, gym class. But sometimes there would be sections of the year where we would do something like swimming, and it lasted only a short time, but I really liked that because it wasn't a competition amongst the toughest boys. It was a personal effort to improve your technique and improve your own body. Had nothing to do with anybody else, and I love to swim. Same thing, oddly, with floor hockey. I never saw that as aggressive because it's not much of a contact sport, really. You have a stick and you're simply trying to move the puck. You're trying to steer around. It's almost like racing or driving. You're trying to get to the puck and keep it away from the other kids. So back to swimming. The radio station was there visiting, and I really loved the fact that I was able to swim and contribute, and it was a that I was part of the school helping the school to helping us to get a good showing of a, a lot a lot of volunteer swimmers. I remember the radio station being there, and I don't maybe it may have been 95X or something. I don't remember. Um, and it was a much happier time. And I I should also mention that there was a senior ball coming up. I had never um, asked anyone out. I had never kissed anyone. I um, I felt that I was un. It wasn't that I was unpopular. I was too unpopular for any girl to be attracted to me. Um, I wish that they had known the real me and not the schlub that was being picked on and made a fool of. Because outside of school, I was reading UFO books. I was reading books about television writing. Again, Star Trek was a big influence and a way for me to learn about television production. And I was learning the format for a television script page, and I was learning about the roles of a television producer and a writer and a director, and how all that works. And I was planning on moving to Los Angeles for college and developing a career. I'm 47 now. I'm going to become 48, and I I regret that. I have dismay that none of that has come true. So anyway, I um, so anyway, that was the side of me, the true side of me outside of school, and I it's difficult not mentioning something in particular. Um, but all right, so I remember the senior ball was coming up in May, I'm pretty sure. And that same time, I was going to be I was going to visit the radio station to be interviewed by, I want to say Jake and the Fat Man. There was a radio host. I remember whatever radio host goes by Fat Man. That's what station I was going to be interviewed by, and then of course that was FM, I think. But on the AM band, I would routinely listen to 570 WSYR, especially in the afternoons and the evenings. I remember Dr. Laura Schlesinger. I remember, and these were shows that I would listen to while I was working, or while I was working on some project, or I was usually on the computer typing away in a script, a television script. And I remember Dr. Laura Schlesinger. I remember Dr. Dean Adele, who would give medical advice. And these weren't conservative talk radio pundits or any of that. It was just advice. There was another one that would give business advice, Bruce Williams, and a number of them were political in the sense that they were talking about topics of politics. Jim Bohannon was a moderate, like, interviewer. He would interview people who had written books about, for example, the new Russian Revolution, or pollution, or whatever, or the history of somebody who would have on a otherwise famous guest. Uh, and then later at night, I remember Gil Gross would have a guest, a different guest each hour. That was typical then. Jim Bohannon did as well. And that's what I would listen to, dating advice and relationship advice and politics. Anyway, so I was more interested in that. So I was able to, after being interviewed for that by the Fat Man, I went out to the offices, and you'd have these hosts and background people and producers that I heard on the radio. 570 WSYR had a morning show, and I remember every Friday they would have a trivia thing, and on Fridays the a number of times, I wish they would do it more often, a number of times they would have several personalities from the radio station come in and do reverse trivia, where callers would call in and try and stump the panel, and it was very funny. They would come up with their own rules. They would have sound effects. It was very nice. I recorded a few of them. I wonder if I still have them on cassette tape since the move. Anyway, I enjoy going there and being part of an adult thing. It was something like the experience I had at Cornell about a year or two earlier. I had been interested in UFOs myself. I'd been reading about them and thoroughly invested in them time-wise. And somebody mentioned that a famous author, not Bud Hopkins, uh, Dr. Jacobs, would be speaking over 2 nights at Cornell, and this was my opportunity to go over to Cornell and be amongst what seemed to be more adult people. They were college students, of course, and it was about a topic that personally myself I was very interested in and I felt very knowledgeable in, but I had never shared it with anybody else. So this is also my opportunity to meet somebody that I'd read about. I'd read. He'd only had 2 books at the time, but and I think maybe I'd only read one of them, but he had. I had seen him maybe a little bit. I knew enough about him for him to seem like a famous person who was in the field that I was interested in, so felt so knowledgeable about. So it was very adult. It wasn't what I wasn't feeling like I was treated like a kid. I felt like an adult, in a group of in a surrounding with somebody talking about a topic that I was very interested in. And I remember one time when uh, somebody wrote on the chalkboard AU uh, H2O and asking if anybody knew what that meant. Or asking somebody nearby if, hey, do you know what this means? Do you catch what this means? And it threw me, but Goldwater, of course, and it made me feel like I was amongst smart, like clever people who where the intelligence was integrated, in contrast to the depiction of a nerd or geek or whatever I'd see on TV. These were normal people who are smart, who are comfortable with um, expressing themselves naturally. Um, so anyway, so this thing about being in the radio station felt something like that, and Star Trek, the original TV series that existed in the 60s had been rerunning all along, and I got into it in 5th grade. Um, 1986, probably well, after the release of Star Trek 4, and then really maybe probably January 1987 would have been when I really got into it and exposing myself to the episodes for the first time. And my mom got a Star Trek Compendium book. It's called the Star Trek Compendium. I think Alan Asherman was the author, and it gave a summary of all the episodes and production details. And I hadn't seen a lot of the episodes at that point. It was my guidebook, and I think something like April, Fox began airing the shows at a 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock something time slot every weekday. So I was becoming familiar with each episode, and I had begun collecting the comic books. I had still been collecting the Transformers comic books. That was about the same time as the Transformers comic books I began collecting, because that was right after seeing Transformers the movie in 1986. I didn't really read the Star Trek DC comic books, but I had them and I treasured them, and I figured at some point I may want to go into reading them. And there was a two-part Who's Who miniseries of issues, two-issue miniseries. It was a Who's Who, and the first issue had Kirk on the cover, the second one had Spock on the cover. It just happened to have Captain Kirk on the cover of the first issue and his first officer Spock on the second cover of the second issue, because it was but it was alphabetical order. So inside were illustrations by DC artists of largely almost all the characters that had appeared in Star Trek, and it's very well written. They had descriptions of them, a history of them, and it was very well done. So that was my guide to the characters. And anyway, I could go into that. Well, all right, it's on my mind. There's one of them who named David, David Marcus, whom Kirk discovers in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan in 1982, that is his son, long lost. Well, not long lost. His estranged son. And then in Star Trek III, for spoilers, I'll just mention this for a moment, that David is killed, becomes killed, and becomes killed. Anyway, so in the write-up in the comic book, this Who's Who comic book issue, it shows him in this majestic sort of stance. He's standing straight with his head tilted up, looking at you, or looking upward, and his face showed a little bit of pain. This is a drawn illustration, full figure. And I remember when my mom would take me upstairs, like sit in the stairs to escape the noise that she heard from harassers. I would take something with me, and sometimes it would be that comic book, and I would look at the comic book and think about how much pain he had gone through, and he'd been able to live through it, endure it, and go and survive. And I thought of myself when I saw that, my situation, when I almost said circumstance, when I saw that. Anyway, all right. So then sixth grade, Star Trek: The Next Generation premieres, and all right, the reason I'm pointing this out is that in senior year, this is their final season, their seventh season airing, and in May sometime they would air the final two-part episode. It was a an hour. It was essentially 2 hours, and then you have to subtract out commercials. But it would be aired as a special 2 hour finale. And I won't go into details. It's a fascinating, it's a very heartfelt, good episode. And as I'm talking about Star Trek, I'm thinking there are people in the audience who think that Star Trek is for dimwits or nerds or geeks, or you have to be very smart in order to appreciate it. No, no, no. It's very, it comments on the human condition, about philosophy, about people's struggles, and about relationships and courage and so forth. It's reminiscent of like sailing ships and exploring and being the best that you can be, and so forth. I hope more people watch the show, and they'll be able to understand it. But that was one of the things that kids would ask me about in a way that I felt was demeaning, or a way of separating themselves from me. And I don't think they understood the show. I don't think they had really seen the show. But it made me feel more separate from them. And so this episode, I'll be brief, it has the main character floating between three time periods. The far future, 25 years after this episode takes place. The current time, which would be in the 7th season, and then in the past, when he goes aboard to become captain of the Enterprise. And it's right before Encounter at Farpoint. And it's a show about regrets people have about the way their lives have gone. It's about time having progressed for good or for bad. It's about estrangement and people just friends simply falling apart and separating, and in addition to that, there was a character that you've met before a number of times who makes an appearance. He made an appearance in Encounter at Farpoint, very first 2-hour first episode, and he guides the main character through this, trying to urge the main character to realize what's actually going on. There's a science fiction phenomenon that's occurring that's causing this, and he simply has to, it's a conundrum, and he has to simply figure out the puzzle. And meanwhile, in his own life, he discovers that in the future we learn that I guess he does, because his mind goes through the three time periods, but in the future he has something called, I think, Irumodic syndrome, something like that, which is it's a fictional thing akin to Alzheimer's, and they think that he's, in the future, they witness him remembering things from his past, and they think he's losing his mind, and there's a medical doctor who's female that he had a crush on at the start of the series, and it's brought up a few times during the series. And I remember in the final episode, we find out that in the future, according to this timeline, they had gotten married and then they're divorced. And so at this point, he had just begun, in the final season, he had begun to open up and confess how he felt about her. And I remember them being in the ready room, and her sitting, I think, on the table, on his desk, and him sitting in the chair next to his desk. And they're talking about, or she says something like, well, you never know what medical treatments or advancements they'll have in the future that will be able to prevent or treat this thing that you will get. Oh, no, no, she's just discovered early signs of the dementia-like illness that he's acquired. And so she says, you never know what a lot could happen. He's one of them. I think she says a lot could happen in 7 years or 25 years. A lot could happen in some X years. So he finally, at the end of the story, he finally the realizes the paradox, and it's a moment when okay, when the other character who's an alien says, you've been exploring, you and your crew have been exploring other planets and so forth, but for one brief moment, you um you thought beyond yourself and to the limitless wonders of existence, and that was beautifully put. And he says, I'll see you out there, and he departs, and then the camera pans down from an overhead view of the main character sitting in a chair. And then the next scene, there's a poker game. Now, typically in several episodes, the other crew members would get together, and there would be a scene with them playing poker in many episodes. And the main character comes in and sits down, and he says, "Didn't mean to interrupt your game." And one of them offers him a seat, and he sits down, and he says, "I should have done this a long time ago." So he sits down, and that's where the episode ends. He says something like, "The Joker's wild," and something, and "The sky's the limit." And then the Enterprise literally moves away into the sunset. And so I was watching this during the second half of senior year, with only weeks away until graduation. And this is a show that I had begun watching in 6th grade. And it formed a lot of, part of my life is intertwined so much with that show and with Star Trek in general. And let me stop this video and continue, see if I can, if there's some other things worth mentioning. Well, I thought about it, and I thought through. I can't think of other things that pertain to that second half of that senior year of high school. But I do want to say that I've mentioned one experience in particular, but I haven't explained what I've just talked about. I haven't brought up what I've talked about really virtually to anyone, aside from maybe one mention, a couple mentions to somebody or somebody, somebody else, whatever, fleeting moments. But it's the first time that I've talked as much as I have about what else was going on, and the two relate, like emotionally. You can't separate one from the other. One impacts upon the other. So, where would I go from here? I feel like I'm 47. I'll be 48 in November, mid-November. I feel as though I haven't become the success that I presumed I would be, and I feel like a nobody in the sense that people don't know. Um, I'm not famous enough that people would know me, and I just have those experiences. Nobody can take that away from me, and it's very healing to be able to finally talk about these other things and to let them loose and get them off my chest and bring them forward to my mind, because that one thing, that one other thing I haven't mentioned, um, has perhaps the dominated my perception and emotional memory of senior year. So I'm hoping that maybe these other things the memories of these other things will counteract that and make me more um, more content with what happened in school, particularly senior year. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.